The morning came in gray, not the kind of gray that promises rain, just the flat, heavy nothing of an October sky in South Georgia that hasn't decided what it wants to be yet. The kind of sky that sits on a town like a lid. Shelby Greer opened her eyes at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her alarm, the way she had every morning for the past 8 months. Her body had learned to wake before the world did, because the world had become something that required preparation. She lay still for a moment listening. The house was quiet. Wren was still asleep down the hall. That particular silence of a 5-year-old, deep in whatever dreams 5-year-olds have, when they don't yet know the full shape of the thing they should be afraid of. Shelby turned her head toward the window. She didn't get up. She didn't pull the curtain. She didn't need to. She already knew. She could feel it the way you feel weather changing before you see it. A pressure. A weight in the air that had nothing to do with barometric readings and everything to do with the fact that a man was parked across the street in a black pickup truck, and he had been there since sometime before she woke up, and he would stay there until he decided not to. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing she could do about it that she hadn't already tried. Wade Pritchard. She said the name in her head the way you press on a bruise. Not because it helps, but because you need to know it's still there. 8 months, 243 days, give or take, since she had walked into the county courthouse with shaking hands and a folder full of documentation and filed for a restraining order against a man who had decided that her life was something he had a right to manage. The judge had granted it. The paperwork was clean. The law on paper was on her side. On paper. The first violation came 6 weeks later. Wade showed up at the Piggly Wiggly while she was buying groceries with Wren. He didn't approach them. He just stood at the end of the cereal aisle with a basket in his hand and looked at her the way a man looks at something he believes belongs to him. She called the sheriff's department from the parking lot. The deputy who came was polite and thorough and wrote everything down and told her they would follow up. The follow-up was a phone call 3 days later, informing her that Mr. Pritchard had been spoken to and had agreed to maintain appropriate distance. Spoken to. The second violation was worse. He came to the house. Not inside, not technically. He stood on the sidewalk, which was public property, at 11 o'clock at night, and he stood there for 45 minutes. She watched him through the gap in the curtains with her phone in one hand and the other hand pressed flat against her chest, where her heart was doing something that didn't feel sustainable. She called the sheriff again. The same deputy came. Wade was gone by then. The deputy took her statement, noted the time, noted the duration, and told her he understood her concern. Her concern, like it was a matter of opinion. She found out about Councilman Hargrove 2 weeks after that. A woman at the courthouse, someone in the clerk's office who had seen enough to develop a conscience about it, pulled Shelby aside in the hallway and spoke in the low, careful voice of a person sharing information they shouldn't be sharing. Hargrove is his cousin, first cousin. She said it the way you say something that explains everything. He's on the county council, has been for 11 years. Nothing moves through that department without his say-so. Shelby had stood in that hallway and felt something shift inside her. Not break, not yet. Shift. The way a foundation shifts when the ground underneath it isn't what you thought it was. She had done everything right. Every single thing the system asked her to do, she had done. Filed the papers, made the calls, documented the violations, spoken calmly and clearly to deputies who were polite and thorough, and who wrote everything down, and who then went back to a department where a man named Hargrove made sure nothing happened. That was 4 months ago. Since then, Shelby had stopped calling the sheriff's department. Not because she had given up, because she had understood finally and completely that calling them was the same as calling no one. And now it was October, and Wade Pritchard was parked across the street for the third time this week, and Shelby Greer was lying in her bed at 5:47 in the morning listening to her daughter sleep, and she was not afraid. She was past afraid. She had gone through afraid and come out the other side of it into something colder and clearer, something that functioned on a different fuel entirely. She was calculating. She got up. Moved through the house without turning on lights because she had learned to navigate every room in the dark, because dark meant he couldn't see her through the windows, and not being seen had become a skill. She practiced the way other women practiced yoga or meditation. She went to the kitchen, put the coffee on, stood at the counter with both hands flat on the surface, and breathed. The backpack was in the hall closet. She had packed it 6 days ago on a Thursday evening after Wren went to sleep, sitting on the closet floor with the door closed and the overhead light on, and her hands shaking so badly she had to stop twice and press them against her knees until they steadied. She packed it the way you pack a bag when you don't know how long someone will need it, when you don't know exactly what's coming, but you know something is. Changes of clothes, a toothbrush in a Ziploc bag. The stuffed rabbit that Wren couldn't sleep without, then took out, then put back in, because if this bag ever needed to be used, Wren would need that rabbit more than she would need the extra pair of socks. And in the front pocket folded once the note. Shelby had written the note 3 times before she got it right. The first version was too long. The second was too vague. The third was what it needed to be, clear and short and written in handwriting that looked calm, even though the hand that wrote it was not. Go to the bar with the eagle sign on Route 12. Show this to whoever's outside. Tell them Shelby sent you. Tell them Wade found us. The bar was called the Eagle's Perch. Shelby had never been inside it. She had never spoken to anyone who went there. She knew about it because of a woman named Katie Dunn. Katie had lived in Shelby's apartment building 2 years ago, before the house on Birchwood, before Wade, before any of it. She was a quiet woman in her 30s who kept to herself and smiled in the hallway, and once brought Wren a coloring book for no reason at all. They were not close friends. They were the kind of neighbors who existed in each other's peripheral vision with mutual goodwill and no particular agenda. Katie moved away after about 5 months. Before she left, she knocked on Shelby's door and stood in the doorway with a box of things she was giving away, and said something that Shelby had filed in the back of her mind without understanding at the time why she was filing it. If you ever really need help, Katie had said, and I mean really need it, the kind where nobody else is going to come through for you, find a bar called the Eagle's Perch out on Route 12. There's an eagle painted on the sign. Go there and ask. Shelby had looked at her. Ask for what Katie had smiled, and the smile had something in it that Shelby didn't have context for yet. Just ask, she said. They helped me once. I never forgot it. And then Katie Dunn moved away and started a new life somewhere else, and Shelby didn't think about the Eagle's Perch again for a long time. Until she did. Until she stood in a closet at midnight, packing a bag for her 5-year-old daughter, writing a note to strangers, and hoping with everything she had left that a woman she barely knew had been telling the truth about a bar she had never visited. The coffee beeped. Shelby poured a cup, didn't drink it. She moved to the living room, stood to the side of the window, and looked out through the narrow gap where the curtain didn't quite meet the frame. The truck was still there. Black. Engine off. Wade was a silhouette behind the wheel, motionless. But something was different this morning. Shelby could feel it before she could name it. The way the truck was parked, pulled closer to the curb than usual, angled slightly toward the house. The way the silhouette wasn't moving at all, not checking a phone, not drinking coffee, just sitting, watching, with the particular stillness of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the right moment to execute it. For 8 months, Wade Pritchard had been circling, testing, showing up and leaving, calling from block numbers, applying pressure in increments small enough that no single one of them qualified as an emergency, but large enough that the cumulative weight of them was crushing her. This morning the circling had stopped. She could feel it. Whatever he had been building toward, whatever endpoint, he had been working his way to one block call and one late-night sidewalk visit at a time he had arrived at it. Today was different, and because today was different, today was the day. Shelby moved. She went to Wren's room first, stood in the doorway, and watched her daughter sleep for 30 seconds, that she counted deliberately in her head because she wanted to remember this. The small shape under the blanket, The yellow hair spread across the pillow. The stuffed rabbit, the other one, the one that hadn't gone into the bag, tucked under one arm. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. Wren stirred, opened her eyes with the slow, unfocused blink of a child surfacing from deep sleep. "Morning, baby," Shelby said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced making her voice steady the way an actor rehearses a line over and over until the emotion underneath it stops leaking through. Wren looked at her. "Mommy, yeah, I need to talk to you about something." She told Wren what she needed to tell her, not everything, not the fear, not the 8 months, not the word restraining order, which was a word no 5-year-old should have to carry. She told her daughter the parts that a 5-year-old could hold. "I need you to be brave today. Really brave, braver than you've ever been." Wren sat up in bed. She was awake now, fully, the way children snap into alertness when they hear a frequency in their parents' voice that they've learned to recognize, even if they can't name it. "I need you to take your backpack, the one in the closet, and go to school like normal. And after school, instead of coming home, I need you to walk to a place. It's not far. I've drawn you a map." She had drawn the map on the back of the note. Simple lines, landmarks Wren would recognize. The school, the gas station on the corner, the road with the big oak tree that Wren liked because it looked like it was waving. And at the end of the road, a rectangle with an eagle drawn on it. "When you get there, I need you to stand outside and ask people for spare change." Just like that. "Spare change, please." Until somebody stops. And when somebody stops, you show them the note in the front pocket of your backpack. And you tell them Mommy sent you. Wren was watching her with those eyes. Those serious, considering eyes that had always seemed to belong to someone much older than 5. The eyes of a child who was born paying attention. "Why can't you come with me?" Wren asked. "Because I have to be here," Shelby said. "I have to make sure the bad man doesn't follow you." There it was, the bad man. The only way she had ever described Wade to Wren. Not his name, not what he was to her, which was nothing, which was a man she had been on 4 dates with over a year ago, before she understood what he was, before she ended it, before he decided that endings were not something she got to choose. The bad man. Wren looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," she said, and the simplicity of that, the clean, total trust of it nearly broke Shelby open. But she held. She held because she had been holding for 8 months, and she could hold for this too. She could hold for one more morning. She helped Wren get dressed, made her breakfast toast with peanut butter, the usual. Wren ate with her usual careful neatness. The way she always ate, the way she did everything with a precision that seemed innate rather than taught, though Shelby liked to think she had something to do with it. At 7:15, Shelby crouched in front of her daughter by the back door. The backpack was on Wren's shoulders. It was heavy, too heavy for a child that small, but Wren didn't complain. She adjusted the straps and stood there looking up at her mother waiting. Shelby took her daughter's face in both hands, looked at her, really looked at her with the particular intensity of a woman who was not sure, despite every calculation she had made, that she was going to see this face again. "Wren, you are braver than you think. I need you to be brave one more time." And then she hugged her. It was a different kind of hug. Shelby knew it and Wren knew it, though neither of them could have articulated exactly what made it different. It was longer. It was tighter. It was the kind of hug where a mother presses her face into her daughter's hair and breathes her in and tries impossibly to put something of herself into the child, something that will sustain her, something for later. When Shelby let go, Wren looked at her with those eyes one more time. Then the 5-year-old turned, walked out the back door, and headed for school with a backpack full of everything her mother could think to give her, and a note in the front pocket addressed to strangers. Shelby stood at the back door and watched until Wren turned the corner and was gone. Then she closed the door, and she stood there for exactly 10 seconds, with her forehead pressed against the wood and her hands flat on either side of the frame, and she let herself feel the full weight of what she had just done. 10 seconds. She counted them. Then she straightened, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and went to the front of the house. She had to make sure Wade's eyes stayed on her. She opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The morning air was cool. The truck was still there 30 yards away. She could feel the moment Wade registered her presence, a shift in the quality of the silhouette, a turning of attention. Shelby looked directly at the truck. She did not hurry. She did not show fear. She walked down the porch steps, turned left on the sidewalk, and headed toward May Colton's house 4 blocks east at a pace that said, "I am going somewhere and I am not running from you." Behind her, after about 30 seconds, she heard the truck engine start. She did not turn around. May Colton's house was a white clapboard on Sycamore Street with a porch that sagged slightly on the left side and window boxes that May kept planted with marigolds in the summer and empty in the fall. May was 71 years old, a retired school teacher, a widow of 14 years, and the kind of woman who noticed things about her neighbors without making them feel noticed. She had fed Shelby dinner every Sunday for the first 6 months after Shelby moved to Birchwood. Shelby had never once told her how bad it really was. May opened the door before Shelby reached the porch. She had the look of a woman who had been up for some time and had seen the truck from her own window. "Come in, child," May said. She didn't ask questions. She held the door and Shelby walked through it, and the door closed and the lock turned. Through May's front window, Shelby watched Wade's truck pass the house slowly, then continue to the end of the street, then turn and pass again. He did this 3 times. Then he parked 2 houses down and sat. Shelby sat on May's couch and wrapped her hands around a cup of tea she didn't drink. And she waited. The hours of that day were the longest of Shelby Greer's life. Longer than the night Wade stood on her sidewalk for 45 minutes. Longer than the afternoon she spent in the courthouse filing paperwork that would turn out to mean nothing. Longer than any of the 243 days that had come before, because on each of those days, Wren had been within reach. Wren had been close enough to hold close enough to protect close enough to be sure of. Today, Wren was walking toward a bar on Route 12 with a note in her backpack, and Shelby could not reach her, could not call her, could not know if she had gotten there, if she was safe, if anyone had stopped, if anyone had read the note, if anyone had cared. She sat on May Colton's couch, and she did not move, and she did not speak, and she watched the clock on May's wall count the minutes, and she held herself together with something that was not quite strength and not quite faith, but some desperate alloy of both. At 3 o'clock, school ended. Shelby closed her eyes. Wren would be walking now, down the school steps, past the gas station along the road with the big oak tree, the backpack heavy on her small shoulders, the map on the back of the note in her mind. At 3:30, Shelby opened her eyes and looked at the clock. Wren should be there by now, standing outside the Eagle's perch if everything went right, if she found the way, if the map was clear enough, if a 5-year-old could walk a mile and a half alone and arrive at the right door. Please, Shelby thought. She was not a religious woman, but she said it anyway to whatever was listening. Please. Outside, Wade's truck hadn't moved. 4 o'clock. No call. No way to know. 5 o'clock. The light began to change. Shelby watched the shadows lengthen through May's curtains, and she thought about her daughter standing outside a bar. As the sun went down, and she pressed her nails into her palms until the pain gave her something to focus on besides the not knowing. May brought food. Shelby couldn't eat. May sat across from her and said nothing because May Colton was a woman who understood when silence was the most useful thing a person could offer. 6 o'clock, 6:30, and then the phone rang. Not Shelby's phone. May's landline, the one mounted on the kitchen wall, the one that almost nobody called anymore. It rang with the old mechanical sound of an actual bell inside a handset, and Shelby's whole body went rigid. May answered it. Listen. Her face changed. She held the phone toward Shelby. "It's for you," May said. "Someone named Colt." Shelby's hand was shaking when she took the phone. She pressed it to her ear and tried twice to speak before sound came out. "My name is Shelby. I'm Wren's mother. Is she with you? Is she safe? A man's voice came back through the line, deep, rough around the edge and very steady. She's sitting right here eating soup. She's safe. She's okay. The sound that came out of Shelby Greer was not quite a cry and not quite a laugh. It was something torn straight from the center of her body, from the place where 8 months of fear and 6.5 hours of not knowing had been compressed into something almost too dense to survive. Oh, God. Oh, thank God. She's a brave kid, the voice said. You raised her right. Shelby couldn't speak for a moment. The tears were coming now, silently running down her face, while May stood in the kitchen doorway with both hands clasped in front of her and her own eyes bright. Can I talk to her? Shelby managed. Please, can I talk to her? A pause. Movement. Then a sound that cracked Shelby's heart clean in two. Mommy, Wren's voice. Small, shaking, completely real. Baby. Oh, baby, I'm here. And then Wren was crying, finally completely the way she had needed to cry for hours and hours but hadn't allowed herself, because she had been told to be brave. And she had been brave. She had been so brave. She had been braver than any 5-year-old should ever have to be. And now she could stop. And the sound of her crying came through the phone and filled May Colton's kitchen. And Shelby slid down the wall to the floor and held the phone with both hands and let her daughter's voice wash over her like something she had been drowning without. I'm coming, baby, Shelby said. She didn't know how yet. She didn't know what came next. But she said it because it was the truest thing she had. I'm coming. I'm going to find you, and I'm coming. On the other end of the line, in a bar called the Eagle's Perch on Route 12, a man named Colt Rourke sat across from a 5-year-old girl who had stood alone for 3.5 hours asking strangers for spare change. He was 51 years old, 22 years in the Iron Saints, with a scar that ran along his left jaw and tattoos that crept up his neck and hands that had done things he was not proud of. Most adults looked at Colt Rourke and immediately recalculated their comfort level. But when Wren had first looked at him outside the bar, she had studied his face, the scar, the ink, the roughness of him, and she had simply blinked, like she was reading him in a language that adults had forgotten. He watched Wren cry into the phone, and he felt something shift inside him that he had thought was settled a long time ago. Something that had been dormant. Something that felt, if he was going to be honest with himself, remarkably like purpose. Around him, the bar was filling with the sound of engines outside. Not one or two, a wave of them. Building. Wren, still crying, looked up at Colt with wet eyes. She held the phone away from her face for just a moment. Are those motorcycles? She asked. Yeah, Colt said. A lot of them. She looked at him. Through the tears, through the exhaustion, through everything this day had demanded of her, something moved across her face. Not a smile, not quite. Something that hadn't arrived yet, but was on its way. She put the phone back to her ear. Mommy, she said, I think they're coming. And on the floor of May Colton's kitchen, Shelby Greer heard the sound of her daughter's voice and the distant growing thunder of engines through the phone, and for the first time in 8 months, she let herself believe that the world contained something besides the man sitting in a truck outside. She pressed the phone against her mouth. I know, baby, she whispered. I hear them. I hear them. And through the window, as the last light of the day bled out of the Georgia sky, May Colton pulled back the curtain and watched the first headlights appear at the far end of Sycamore Street. They were coming. The sound arrived before the machines did. It came low and rolling through the streets of Milburn like something geological, like the earth itself had shifted underneath the town and was letting everyone know about it. It filled the spaces between houses. It rattled the windows in their frames. It reached into May Colton's living room, where Shelby stood with the phone still pressed against her chest and her daughter's voice still echoing inside her, and it changed the shape of the air. May was at the window. She had pulled the curtain back an inch, just enough to see, and she was standing there with one hand on the fabric and the other pressed against her collarbone, in the particular posture of a woman who has lived 71 years and thought she had seen most of what the world had to offer, and was now being presented with evidence to the contrary. Shelby, May said. Her voice had gone strange. Honey, you need to come look at this. Shelby moved to the window. Her legs were not entirely reliable. They had been unreliable since that morning, since she had pressed her face into Wren's hair and breathed her in and sent her out the back door into the world that Shelby could not guarantee would treat her gently. She had been operating on something other than physical strength for most of the day, something closer to the stripped-down machinery of a woman who has removed every unnecessary function and is running on the single imperative of keeping her child alive. She looked through the gap in the curtain. The street outside May Colton's house, the quiet residential street with its cracked sidewalks and its leaning mailboxes and its ordinary Tuesday evening stillness, was no longer ordinary. Motorcycles were rolling in from the far end, not fast, not loud and reckless the way you might imagine. They came with a kind of controlled heavy gravity, like a tide that has made up its mind about where it is going and cannot be redirected. Their headlights swept across the houses in slow arcs, catching porch railings and parked cars, and the edges of May's marigold boxes in brief flashes of white light, one after another, and then more. Shelby pressed her hand against the glass. The window was cold under her palm. The vibration of the engines came through it, a low, steady pulse that she could feel in her wrist. Her phone buzzed, the same unknown number from before. She answered on the first ring. "We're outside," Colt said. Shelby watched another wave of headlights turn the corner. Her mouth opened. She closed it, opened it again. All of them she finally managed. All of them. She stared through the glass at the street filling up with machines and the men who rode them, and she felt something happening inside her chest that she did not have the vocabulary for. Not relief, not yet. Relief requires a feeling of safety, and she was not safe yet, and she knew it. Something more fundamental than relief. Something closer to the experience of being seen after a very long time of being invisible. Why, she whispered, "They don't even know me." There was a pause on Colt's end, not a hesitation. The pause of a man selecting his words with real care, the way you select tools for a job that matters. "Because your little girl stood outside a bar for 3.5 hours, he said. "And she didn't fall apart. She handed me that note with both hands like she was giving me something precious." Another pause. Nobody walks away from something like that, Shelby. The tea on the coffee table behind her had gone completely cold. She had poured it hours ago in another lifetime when the day was just fear and waiting and the terrible mathematics of not knowing. Now the day was something else. She was not yet sure what, but it was something else. May, still at the window, had both hands on the curtain now. She was watching the bikes settle into positions up and down the street with the expression of a woman processing an event that fell outside her considerable frame of reference. "They're parking," May reported. Her voice had taken on the quality of a war correspondent delivering dispatches from the front. "They're just parking and getting off and standing there." She turned to Shelby. "Lord have mercy, there must be 80 of them." "Closer to 90, Colt said through the phone. He had clearly heard. "Tell your neighbor not to worry. Nobody here is going to cause trouble. We're just going to make sure nobody gets to your door tonight who shouldn't." Shelby pressed her palm flat against her sternum. Something was happening there in the space behind her ribs. Something that felt like it was either breaking or healing, and she could not fully tell which, and it occurred to her that perhaps those two things were not as different as she had always assumed. "He knows this address," she said. Her voice dropped low. "Wade, he knows May's house. He's been watching me for months, Colt. He knows everywhere I go." "I know," Colt said. "We know. Dozer pulled everything on him an hour ago." She swallowed. "And that's why we're here." His voice was flat and certain, the way a closed door is flat and certain. Not aggressive, not posturing, just a simple statement of a fact that has been decided and will not be revisited. She heard the front door open behind her and turned. May was on the porch, hands on her hips, surveying the street with the expression of a woman who has accepted the situation and moved directly to logistics. "I'm putting on coffee," May announced to approximately 90 people. Lord knows I don't have enough cups, but I'm putting it on. Three of the men nearest the porch said, "Thank you, ma'am," in quick succession, and May gave a short, firm nod, like she was accepting a report from subordinates she was mildly impressed by, and went back inside. Shelby almost laughed. It got halfway up her throat and turned into something else, something that caught and held and burned. She pressed the phone harder against her ear. "Is she okay?" she asked. "Ren, right now, is she okay right now?" "She's sitting in a corner booth eating a grilled cheese," Colt said. "My buddy's girlfriend, Jolene, is with her. She hasn't left her side." A pause. "She's tough, your girl." He said it with something in his voice that Shelby recognized. Respect, the same note that appears when someone has witnessed a thing they didn't expect and been changed by it. "She told me her teacher says bikers are dangerous." I asked her what she thought about that. "What did she say?" He was quiet for a beat. "She said we're like guard dogs. Dangerous but not bad. Just protecting something." Shelby closed her eyes. That was Ren. That was her daughter entirely, the way she took the world apart and rebuilt it in shapes that made more sense than the original. A 5-year-old standing outside a bar, surrounded by men in leather vests with tattoos and scars, and she had looked at them and seen guard dogs. Colt spoke again. "Jolene's going to bring her to you. We're sending a car. But I need you to stay inside until we say all right. Can you do that?" "Yes. All right. She'll be there soon." The car arrived 11 minutes later. Shelby counted every one of them from May's living room window. Her fingers on the glass, her breath making small circles of fog that she wiped away because she could not afford to miss the moment when it came. Headlights from a different direction. Not a motorcycle. A sedan coming down the side street, pulling up to May's curb. Shelby was out the door before she consciously decided to move. Past May. Past the couch. Past the cold tea in the kitchen and the phone she had left on the counter. Through the front door and down the porch steps with her bare feet hitting the cold concrete of the driveway. The car door opened. A woman she didn't know, Jolene, dark-haired and kind-eyed and already crying, held the door wide. And Ren came out at a dead run. The impact of that small body hit Shelby like a wave she had been bracing against all day, and that still knocked every bit of air from her lungs. She went down to her knees on the driveway. The concrete was cold and rough under her skin, and she did not feel it at all. She gathered her daughter in with both arms, and Ren's face was against her neck, and Ren was saying, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," in that breathless, desperate way that children say things when they have been holding them in too long. Shelby said nothing. There were no words left in her. Just this. Just this. Around them, the engines had gone quiet one by one until the whole street was still. And in that stillness, roughly 88 men who had ridden hard to get here stood in the dark and did not make a sound, because they understood without being told that this moment was not for them. Jolene stood beside the car with her arms crossed and her jaw working, trying very hard not to cry. She failed on the second try. The minutes passed. Shelby stayed on her knees on the driveway with her daughter, and the night held its breath around them. Then slowly Shelby stood. She kept Ren's hand in hers, held it in the way that parents do when they are not sure they will ever be able to let go again. And she looked across the dark street at the gathered men. So many of them standing quiet, watching her with expressions she couldn't read at this distance, but that carried collectively a weight she could feel from where she stood. Her eyes found Colt. He walked over, stopped at a respectful distance. Shelby looked at him for a long moment. Her face was marked from crying, but her eyes were clear. She had done her crying. What came next required something else. "Tell me what you know," she said. So he told her. Straight and clean, no softening, because she had handled harder things than facts and she deserved the truth. He told her about what Dozer had found, the restraining order violations, both documented, both buried. The cousin Hargrove on the county payroll making sure nothing moved. The location they had on Wade. The fact that he was still out there. When he finished, Shelby was quiet for a moment. Ren stood beside her, holding her hand with both of hers, leaning slightly against her mother's hip. The child said nothing, just listened the way she had been listening all evening, absorbing everything with those quiet, serious eyes. "He's not going to stop," Shelby said finally. "I need you to understand that. I've been telling myself for 8 months that maybe he'd stop. Maybe he'd move on. Maybe something would change." She shook her head. "He's not going to stop. I've filed papers. I've talked to lawyers. I've done everything right." She looked directly at Colt. "Nothing I did by the rules made any difference. I know," Colt said. "So what happens tonight?" she asked. "What does this actually mean, 90 men on my street? That's not a permanent solution. Tomorrow you all go home and he's still out there." And there it was. The real question, the one that sat underneath everything else. Because she was right. A show of force was one thing. An actual solution was something else entirely. And the distance between those two things was the distance Shelby had been stranded in for 8 months. Colt was quiet for a moment. Then a man stepped forward from the edge of the group. Medium height, middle-aged, graying at the temples, with an attention so complete it was almost uncomfortable. He stopped in front of Shelby and looked at her directly. "I used to be a detective," the man said. Shelby blinked. 15 years county level. The man's name was Deacon, and his voice carried the quiet precision of someone who has spent a career making sure that words mean exactly what they say. "I know the cousin Dozer mentioned. I know the loop this guy has been working to stay clean." He paused. "And I know 3 people in the state DA's office who owe me favors they've been very relieved not to have called in yet." Shelby stared at him. "The violations are documented," Deacon continued. "There's a pattern, and with the right calls made tonight the right way to the right people," he stopped. "He doesn't need to be scared off, ma'am. He needs to be off the street. And I think we can make that happen." The silence after that had a different texture, not the held breath silence from before, something that felt for the first time in a very long time like forward movement. Shelby looked at Deacon, looked at Colt, looked at the street full of men who had come because a 5-year-old girl asked for spare change and handed a stranger a piece of paper with both hands. She opened her mouth to respond, and that was when Dozer's phone rang. He stepped away to answer it, and something in the way his body changed when he heard what was on the other end. A slight stiffening, a tightening of the shoulders made Colt cross to him before the call was even finished. Dozer hung up, looked at Colt. He moved. Dozer said, "Say that again." "Pritchard, he just moved." That was Kendrick from over on Miller Street. "Says he watched a truck come past his place 60 seconds ago, heading this direction." Dozer's voice was flat and controlled, but his eyes were not. "He knows Colt. Somehow he knows she's here." The street shifted. Not a sound, not a signal, a change in the air. The way a group of people who are experienced in exactly this kind of situation recalibrate without needing to be told. Backs straightened. Conversation stopped. Eyes moved to the road. Colt turned to Shelby in one motion. "Get inside. Right now." Shelby grabbed Ren and moved. Jolene was already on the porch holding May's front door open, and she got both of them through it in about 4 seconds flat. Through May's front window, Shelby watched. She was not going to be sent away from this. She was not going to sit in a back room and wait for someone to tell her what happened. She had been sitting and waiting for 8 months, and she was done with it. She watched the street reorganize itself with quiet, deliberate efficiency. Bikes repositioned. Men who had been standing in loose groups were now standing with intent. The whole texture of the avenue changed from a parking lot to something that had a shape and a purpose. The truck appeared at the far end of the street 3 minutes later. It slowed. Any driver would slow rounding a corner into a residential street that was lined curb to curb with motorcycles and the men who rode them. It slowed and then it stopped altogether about 40 yards from May's house. The engine stayed running. Colt walked forward. Just him. Steady. Down the middle of the street toward the idling truck. Behind him, Shelby could see movement. Not following, not rushing. A slow spread of presence up and down both sides of the street. He stopped about 20 feet from the truck. The driver's window was down. "You're Wade," Colt said. Not a question. A long pause. "Who's asking?" Colt Rourke. "And roughly 87 friends of mine." Another pause. "I'm just here to talk to Shelby." Wade's voice had an edge of practiced reasonableness in it. The tone of a man who had refined the art of sounding normal while doing things that were not normal. "She and I have unfinished business." "No, you don't. That's not really your call, is it?" "Tonight it is." Shelby watched from the window. Her hand was on the glass. Ren was behind her, held tight against Jolene's side, watching over Shelby's shoulder with those eyes that missed nothing. "There is not one version of tonight," Colt continued, his voice carrying in the still air, "where you get to her door. Not one. And you can sit here and think about it as long as you want. That's not going to change." The engine ticked in the silence. "There's a man back there who used to be a detective and still knows the right people. He's been on the phone for the last half hour. By morning, every documented violation of that restraining order is going to be sitting on a desk in the state DA's office." Colt paused. "Turn this truck around. Go home. Stay there or don't, but understand what you're choosing if you don't." The night pressed in. 40 yards behind Colt, the street held. "You don't know what she did," Wade said. His voice had changed. The manufactured reasonableness was gone. Something underneath it now. Something raw and exposed and ugly. "You don't know anything about what's between us." "You're right," Colt said. "I don't. And it doesn't matter. It matters. It doesn't matter," Colt said again. "There is a little girl in that house who packed a bag and stood alone for 3.5 hours because her mother was trying to protect her from you. That's all I need to know. That's everything." Inside May's house, Shelby heard every word. The window was thin and the night was still, and Colt's voice carried with the particular clarity of a man who is not shouting, but who has no intention of being misheard. She heard what Wade said. "You don't know what she did." And she felt the old familiar response rise in her, the reflex to explain, to justify, to lay out the timeline and prove that she had done nothing wrong. 4 dates. She had gone on 4 dates with a man she met at a hardware store, and then she had told him kindly and directly that she didn't see it going further. That was what she did. That was the entirety of it. But she didn't need to explain it. Not anymore. Not to anyone. Because a man she had never met was standing in the middle of a street telling Wade Pritchard that it didn't matter, that none of it mattered, that the only thing that mattered was a 5-year-old with a backpack. The truck sat. 1 second, 5 seconds, 10. Then so slowly it was almost imperceptible the reverse lights came on. A sound moved through the gathered men behind Colt. Not a cheer, more of an exhale. A collective release of something that had been pulled very tight. Wade Pritchard backed his truck to the corner, turned it, and drove away. Shelby watched the tail lights until they disappeared. Her hand was still on the glass. And for one long, suspended moment, she allowed herself to believe it was over. But something in her body, some instinct built over 8 months of learning to read danger the way a sailor reads weather, would not let her settle. She had watched Wade back down too many times. She had watched him leave and come back. Leave and come back. The cycle of it, the terrible rhythm, had taught her something that the people on the street did not yet know. Backing down was not the same as giving up. She was still standing at the window, still holding that thought, when Deacon appeared on the porch 20 minutes later. His face was the face of a man receiving information that confirmed something he had suspected. "He didn't go home," Deacon said. Shelby's hand dropped from the glass. Deacon looked at her through the open front door. His eyes were steady, but she could see the urgency underneath them. "He went to his brother's place. Glenn Pritchard property off Route 7. And then Glenn called us. Wade took Glenn's old truck. No GPS. He's coming back around the back road." The words landed in the room, and Shelby felt something shift inside her. Not the breaking she had felt that morning, not the desperate mathematics of the day. Something else. Something that started in the same place as fear, but turned halfway through into something harder and hotter and more deliberate. Colt appeared behind Deacon. His face was set, already planning, already moving to the next thing. Shelby, we need to go. He's coming around the back way. We'll get there first, but you need to stay here with May and wait. No, Shelby said. The word came out clear and level and completely without negotiation. Colt looked at her. Don't tell me to stay, she said. He's been making me stay for 8 months. Stay in the house. Stay away from the windows. Stay quiet. Stay small. Stay afraid. She looked at Colt with eyes that were dry and certain. I am done staying. Colt held her gaze for a long moment, long enough that Wren looked back and forth between the two adults with the focused attention of a child conducting a very serious assessment. You stay in the car, Colt said finally. Both of you, and I mean in the car. In the car, Shelby agreed. Wren very quietly said, I can be brave. I know you can. Colt said, that's exactly why you're staying in the car with your mom. Wren considered this logic, found it acceptable, nodded once. May appeared from the kitchen with 2 travel mugs of coffee and the expression of a woman who has processed the extraordinary and arrived firmly on the side of practical contribution. You take these, she said, pressing them into Jolene's hands, and you come back and tell me how it ends, because I am 71 years old and my heart cannot take not knowing. Yes, ma'am, Jolene said. And you? May turned and pointed a decisive finger at Colt. You bring this to a finish. A proper one. Yes, ma'am, Colt said. And he meant it. Outside, the engines woke one by one. The sound built on itself, rolling and rising, filling the street with something that was half thunder and half something harder to name. 6 bikes stayed behind 6 men keeping position on Sycamore Street because Wade was unpredictable and nobody was taking the chance that this was a diversion. Jolene drove. Shelby sat in the passenger seat. Wren was in the back. Shelby's hand rested on her daughter's knee, and Wren had her face turned toward the window, watching the bikes move alongside them. The way children watch things that are too large and too real to fully process, but that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. At a red light, Shelby looked at the bikes flanking the car, all of them moving in the same direction, all of them moving for her. Then Wren's hand found hers in the dark of the back seat, small fingers wrapping around her mother's wrist with a grip that was surprisingly strong. Mommy Wren said, yeah, baby, I've got you. 3 words, spoken with the absolute certainty of a 5-year-old who has decided that this is how it works now, that protecting goes both ways, that if her mother had sent her out into the world that morning to find help, then she, Wren, was now going to hold her mother together for whatever came next. Shelby felt one tear escape, just one. She let it fall, pressed her daughter's hand back, looked forward, and breathed. The light changed. They moved. The thunder moved with them. The back road to Sycamore Street was the kind of road that existed because someone had needed to get somewhere a long time ago, and nobody had bothered to improve it since. Narrow, unlit, flanked by pine trees that pressed in close enough to scrape a truck's mirrors if the driver wasn't careful. The kind of road you only knew about if you had lived here long enough or if you had been watching someone long enough to learn every way in and every way out. Wade Pritchard knew this road. He had driven it before, probably more than once in the dark, with his headlights off, learning the route the way a hunter learns the trails near a blind. Shelby knew this because knowing how Wade thought had become a survival skill. She had spent 8 months mapping the architecture of his obsession, not because she wanted to understand him, but because understanding him was the difference between anticipating what came next and being destroyed by it. And tonight she had anticipated. She had known in the part of her that had been running these calculations for 243 days that backing down at the front of the street was not the end. It was a pause, a recalculation. Wade Pritchard did not stop. He adjusted, but so did she. Jolene drove fast. The car took the turns of the by road with a sharpness that pushed Shelby against the door and made Wren brace both hands on the seat in front of her. Through the window, Shelby could see the motorcycles moving alongside them, their headlights cutting through the trees in sweeping arcs. They came around the final bend, and Shelby saw it before Jolene said anything. The truck. Glenn Pritchard's truck, older rust along the wheel wells, parked sideways across the alley behind May Colton's house. Engine running. One door open. The interior light casting a weak yellow rectangle on the cracked asphalt. Jolene stopped the car. Shelby heard the bikes behind them cutting their engines one by one. The heavy metallic sound of kickstands dropping in rapid succession. And then quiet. The loaded quiet of 80-something people paying very close attention. Colt was off his bike and moving toward the truck before the last engine died. His boots on the asphalt were the only sound. Shelby watched him through the windshield, walking steady, unhurried down the middle of the alley the same way he had walked down the middle of the street an hour ago. The same pace, the same certainty. Wade Colt said. His voice was not loud, but it carried in the alley in a way that made the word feel like it filled the entire space. Step out where I can see you. 3 seconds of nothing. Shelby counted them. 1, 2, 3. Then Wade Pritchard stepped out from the shadow on the far side of the truck, and the first thing Shelby registered through the windshield and the half-light of the truck's interior lamp was that his hands were empty. No weapon, just a man. Heavy-set mid-40s, wearing the expression of someone who has run very far in a very short amount of time and arrived somewhere he hadn't entirely planned to arrive. He looked at Colt, looked at the men spreading out behind Colt, looked at the truck like he was considering getting back in it. It's over, Wade Colt said. You don't get to tell me when things are over, Wade said. But the conviction wasn't there. The words came out without the foundation that had held them up an hour ago. They were just words now. You're right, Colt said, and the agreement seemed to catch Wade off guard. I don't, but the state DA's office does, and the sheriff who's coming right now does. A pause. Your brother called it in, Wade. Shelby watched the impact of that move visibly across Wade Pritchard's face. Even through the windshield, even in the dim light, she could see it. Something giving way behind his eyes. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies. A quiet interior collapse. The particular devastation of a man hearing that the last person he expected to cross him just did. Glenn Wade said. He said the name like the word itself was a wound. Yeah, Colt said quietly. Glenn. In the back seat, Wren was watching. Her face was pressed close to the window, her breath making small clouds on the glass. She had not spoken since they stopped. She was absorbing this the way she absorbed everything completely silently, with those eyes that would carry the memory of this alley for the rest of her life. A silence opened up. Somewhere inside it, distant but approaching the sound of a siren. Still far but getting less far, moving with purpose through the night. Wade looked at the ground, looked at his own hands. He had the appearance of a man taking inventory of everything he had built over the past 8 months and finding that all of it, every calculated move, every phone call from block numbers, every slow drive past a woman's house, every late-night vigil on a public sidewalk, had led him to exactly here. An alley behind a 71-year-old woman's house, surrounded by people he didn't know who had all come for a reason that had nothing to do with him. I just wanted to talk to her, he said. And the terrible thing was, he sounded like he believed it. No, Colt said, not angrily, not with contempt, just flatly honestly, the way you tell a man a true thing because someone has to. You didn't want to talk to her. You wanted her to feel what you decided she should feel. And that's been the whole thing from the beginning. Wade opened his mouth, closed it. The siren was closer now. There's a little girl in a car 2 streets over, Colt said. 5 years old. She packed her own bag this morning because her mother had to plan for the possibility that you were going to make today the worst day of their lives. She stood alone outside a bar for 3.5 hours. He let that sit. That little girl is going to be fine. She's going to grow up and she is going to be fine. And you are going to have to live with the fact that a 5-year-old had more courage in one afternoon than you've had in 8 months. Shelby heard every word. The words came through the glass and settled into her chest, and she felt them there, each one like stones being placed in a precise arrangement, building something that had a shape she recognized. Not just the shape of an ending, the shape of the truth. The truth she had known for 8 months, but that had never been spoken aloud by anyone but her, and that she had begun to doubt because when you are the only person saying a thing, you start to wonder if the thing is real. It was real. She heard it spoken by a stranger in an alley, and it was real. Wade Pritchard said nothing more. He was still standing there in the dark when the first sheriff's cruiser came around the corner, its lights painting the alley in alternating red and blue. And then Shelby opened the car door. Jolene reached for her. "Shelby, wait," he said, "you'd stay in the car." Shelby looked at her, not with defiance, not with recklessness, with the particular calm of a woman who has arrived at a decision that is not negotiable. "I need to see this," she said. She got out. She stood in the alley 20 feet from the man who had made her world a small and terrified place for 8 months, and she looked at him. She did not speak. She did not need to. She stood there in her bare feet on the cold asphalt with her shoulders back and her chin level, and she let him see her. Not afraid, not hiding, not staying. Wade's eyes found her, and whatever was left in him, whatever structure of justification and entitlement and distorted need had been holding him together, she watched it leave. Not all at once, in pieces, like a building losing its supports one by one. He looked away. Deacon materialized beside the arriving officers. He spoke in the practiced, precise shorthand of a former detective relaying facts to current law enforcement. Names, dates, documented violations, the call from Glenn, the pattern. The whole 8-month architecture of it laid out with a kind of detail that makes things real and hard and undeniable. Wade sat on the hood of Glenn's truck with his wrist behind him and his head down, and he looked more than anything else tired. Like a man who had been running on something combustible for too long and had finally completely run out of it. "I used to be different," Wade said, very quietly. To no one in particular. Nobody answered. There was nothing to answer. The siren had stopped. The lights were still turning. And in the alley, the men of the night stood back and let the law do what the law had failed to do for 8 months. Shelby turned back to the car. Wren was out, standing beside the open door with Jolene's hand on her shoulder, looking at the scene with those serious, unflinching eyes. "Is that him?" Wren asked. "Is that Wade?" Shelby went still. She had never used his name in front of Wren. She had only ever said the bad man. But Wren had been listening all evening. Wren had been listening for months. Children hear the things that adults believe they have hidden, and they carry those things in places that adults cannot reach. "Yeah, baby," Shelby said. "That's him." Wren stared at Wade Pritchard for a long, serious moment. The focused, unflinching stare of a child who has been afraid of something for a very long time and is now looking at it directly for the first time, measuring it against what it had felt like from the inside. Then Wren turned away from him, a clean, deliberate turn, like closing a door on something she was finished with. She walked to her mother, put her arms around Shelby's waist, and Shelby went down to her knees on the asphalt and held her daughter with everything she had left. The sheriff's cruiser pulled out of the alley at 11:47 p.m. Shelby watched it go, watched until the lights disappeared around the corner and the alley returned to the ordinary dark of an ordinary night. And she stood there holding Wren's hand and felt the full weight of what the last 6 hours had been. Then Flint appeared. He had something in his hand, a phone, and his face was doing something complicated. He turned the screen so Colt could see it. 4 words from County Dispatch. "Bail denied, he's in." Colt read it again, looked at Flint. "Bail denied," Colt said, loud enough for everyone. The alley received this information in various ways. Dozer exhaled through his nose like a pressure valve releasing. Boone pressed both hands flat against the top of his head and looked at the sky. Jolene made a sound that was half laugh and covered her face. Shelby went very, very still. It's real, she whispered. It's real, Deacon confirmed. Bail denied means he's in county holding tonight. With the case, the DA's office has with Glenn's statement, with his prior violation history, that's where he stays pending trial. Shelby stood in the alley holding her sleeping daughter because Wren had done what children do when the emergency is over and the body takes what it has been owed. The girl had simply closed her eyes against her mother's shoulder and gone under, still holding Shelby's hand, utterly trusting that the world was now safe enough to leave for a while. And Shelby started to laugh. Not a performance, not hysteria, real laughter, broken and genuine and helpless. The kind that comes out of a body that has been clenched for 8 straight months and has just without warning been given permission to unclench. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then it turned into something quieter, and she pressed her face against the top of Wren's head and stood there in the dark of the alley and let the night hold them both. The next morning came gray and ordinary and completely indifferent to what the night had been. Shelby sat in the spare room of Jolene's sister's house, a clean room in a quiet neighborhood that Wade Pritchard did not know existed, and she waited for the world to confirm that the things that had happened were real. At 9 a.m. the phone rang. Margaret Pace, attorney, Deacon's contact. She went through everything with Shelby for 40 minutes. Documented violations. Glenn's cooperation. The DA's case. You have a real case, Margaret said. With Glenn cooperating, it changes everything. At 1 p.m., Shelby sat at Dozer's kitchen table with Colt, Deacon, Flint, Boone, Jolene, and a plate of food that Dozer had produced with the competence of a man who had been feeding large groups for decades. Wren was in the back room, watching cartoons with Dozer's ancient basset hound Walter, who received the child's company with the dignity and patience of a very old gentleman. Deacon presented the situation plainly. Glenn Pritchard wanted to meet Shelby. He had information things Wade had done that went beyond the harassment. A storage unit in both brothers' names containing documentation that Wade had kept records of his own surveillance, the kind of evidence a DA could use to build a case with real teeth. Shelby sat with this for almost a full minute. Nobody filled the silence. He could have called the police 8 months ago, she said. Her voice was level, but the effort of keeping it level was visible. He knew. He could have. And he didn't. Yes, Deacon said. He didn't soften it. And now that it all blew up, now he wants to cooperate. She looked up. That's not heroism. That's damage control. It doesn't have to be heroism to be useful. Deacon said. Another silence. Shelby turned her coffee mug in her hands. Set it up, she said finally. I'll meet him. And then Boone cleared his throat. Can I ask you something, he said. His voice had a quality to it that was different from his usual directness. Something careful. Who told you about the bar, about the Eagle's perch? Shelby looked at him. A woman, 2 years ago before all this started. She lived in my building for a few months and then moved away. Her name was Katie Dunn. She said if I ever really needed help to find a bar with an eagle sign and ask. The kitchen went quiet. Boone was looking at the table. Something in his jaw had changed. Katie Dunn, he said. That was about 4 years ago. Her ex. Bad situation. We helped her relocate. Got her clear of him. He raised his eyes. She moved away about 2 years back. Said she was making a fresh start somewhere new. The silence that followed had the quality of something coming fully around. A circle closing in a kitchen in a small town in South Georgia. A chain of people helping people link by link by link, going back years. Shelby stared at him. She trusted you, she said slowly, and then she told me to trust you. Boone looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I posted something last night on Facebook. Around 2 in the morning after I got home. He pulled out his phone, showed her the screen. No names, no details, just a few lines. 4 years ago, we helped someone get clear. Last night, her act of kindness came back around and helped someone else. If you're out there, Katie, it worked. It really worked. You were right about us. By that afternoon, the post had been shared 263 times. Shelby read it. Read it again. Does she know? Has she seen it? Boone's phone buzzed at the exact moment she asked. He looked at the screen. His face did something complicated and genuine. He turned it to Shelby. A comment. Time-stamped 4 minutes ago. I know exactly who this is about. I've thought about her every single day. Tell her she was always stronger than she knew. Shelby read it, and then she laughed. The same laugh as the night before, broken and completely real. The laugh of a woman who kept encountering evidence that the world was more connected and more kind than her worst year had led her to believe. Wren appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had the expression of a child who had been watching cartoons, but had tuned into some frequency that said something important was happening in the other room. Are you okay, Mommy? Yes, baby. Come here. Wren crossed the kitchen and climbed into her mother's lap. She looked around the table at the adults. Deacon Colt Flint, Dozer, Boone, Jolene with those considering eyes. Are you all Mommy's friends now? She asked. The table was quiet for one beat. Yeah, Colt said. I think we are. Wren considered this. Apparently it met her standards because she turned back to her mother and said, Can I have more juice? Dozer was on his feet before the sentence was finished. Later, as the afternoon turned to evening, Deacon's phone rang. He stepped out, came back, sat down. His voice was measured the way it always was, but something underneath it was different. The DA's office received the full case file this morning, he said. Glenn's cooperation is the difference maker. And Councilman Hargrove has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal affairs review. Glenn's statement contained information about how certain violations were being buried and who was making sure they stayed buried. Shelby absorbed this. The man who had made the system fail her for 8 months was being removed from the system, not by her, not by bikers, by the weight of the truth finally placed on the right desk in front of the right people. His own cousin, she said quietly. It took his own cousin to finally bring it down. It took you, Deacon said. And his voice, which was almost always flat and measured, had something different in it. You made the plan. You packed the bag. You sent Wren with the note. Every single thing that happened after that came from what you set in motion. As evening came, Shelby walked Colt to his bike in Dozer's driveway. She had something in her hand. She wants to give you this, Shelby said. Wren, she asked me this afternoon if she could draw you a picture. She held out a folded piece of paper. Colt took it, unfolded it. A crayon drawing, imprecise and completely confident, full of color and intention. A row of motorcycles that looked like elongated bumblebees. A small figure with yellow hair. A large figure with what was clearly meant to be a scar on its jaw, drawn with careful attention in red crayon. And above the figures, in large, uneven letters that marched across the page with the fierce determination of a child who was still learning, but was absolutely going to get this down, 7 words. Thank you for not riding away. Colt stood in the dark of the driveway and looked at that drawing for a long time. Shelby watched him, said nothing. He folded it very carefully, put it in the inside pocket of his vest against his chest where things went when you needed them to stay safe. Tell her she's welcome, he said. His voice came out lower than he intended. She knows, Shelby said. She said she could tell by your hands. She told me that this morning. She said you were a good man and she could tell by your hands. Colt looked at his hands, scarred hands, hands that had done things he wasn't proud of. Hands that had held a folded piece of paper like it was made of glass and had set a grilled cheese sandwich in front of a 5-year-old with a care that had surprised him. He shook his head slightly, not disagreeing, just not fully understanding and deciding that not fully understanding was all right. Shelby looked at him. Katie said I was always stronger than I knew, she said. I've been thinking about that all afternoon. She paused. I think she was wrong. I think I always knew. I just needed to believe it mattered. She held his gaze. You all made it matter. Colt looked at her for one long moment. Then he started the engine. The sound of it filled the quiet street, steady and low. He pulled out of the driveway, turned onto the street. He had one stop to make before he went home. May Colton opened her door before he knocked. She was still fully dressed, a dish towel in her hands, a different one from earlier, which meant she had been in the kitchen doing something with her hands, because that was what women like May did when they were waiting for news. She read his face. Her whole body exhaled. "Come in," she said. "I'll get the coffee." He sat at her kitchen table at 20 past midnight and told her everything. Clean and straight and complete the way she deserved. The alley, the arrest, bail denied. Deacon and the DA, Margaret Pace calling at 9, Glenn's cooperation, Hargrove suspended, Katie Dunn's comment on a Facebook post at 1 in the afternoon. The circle closing. May sat across from him with both hands around her mug and listened without interrupting once. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded, the firm, decisive nod of someone filing something in the correct place permanently. "Good," she said, just that. The single word carrying the full weight of a 71-year-old woman who had seen enough of the world to understand exactly what good meant when it was genuinely earned. Colt left May's house with a travel mug of coffee pressed into his hands, with an authority that didn't leave room for refusal. He rode home through the empty streets with the drawing in his vest pocket against his chest, where he could feel the edges of it with every breath. His phone buzzed one last time. An unknown number. "This is Shelby. We're at Jolene's sister's place." Wren woke up for about 30 seconds in the car and asked if Colt was okay. "I told her yes." She said good and went back to sleep. "I thought you should know that." "Thank you, Colt. For all of it. All of you." He read it again. Stood in his driveway for another 30 seconds with the phone in his hand. Then he typed back, "Get some sleep, both of you. Everything else can wait until morning." He pocketed the phone, went inside, sat at his own kitchen table in the dark, and thought about a 5-year-old girl who had stood outside a bar for 3.5 hours because her mother needed her to be brave, who had handed a piece of paper to a stranger with both hands and trusted him with everything it contained, who had not cried until she was safe. And when she was safe, she had cried completely. And when she was done, she had eaten soup and asked the right questions, and held her mother together with both small hands and fallen asleep against a basset hound like a child who had done a full day's work and was now entirely at peace. She had said thank you for not riding away. And somewhere across town, Shelby and Wren were settling into a room that was safe. And in a county holding cell, Wade Pritchard was beginning to understand the full shape of what the night had cost him. And in an office building downtown, a file with his name on it was waiting for morning. And May Colton was probably in her kitchen with a dish towel and a satisfied expression. And Deacon was somewhere on the phone being precisely and usefully himself. And Flint was at home thinking about his granddaughter without admitting he was doing it. A little girl had asked for spare change, and by nightfall, 90 engines had answered. But all of it, every single engine, every man who rode through the dark, every phone call, and every closed fist, and every moment of hell breath in a quiet alley, all of it began with a woman who sat on a closet floor at midnight and packed a bag for her daughter and wrote a note to strangers and trusted with everything she had left that the world still contained people who would come when you called. The world did, and they came.